Hello, community, and welcome back to another Keeping It Real with Dr. Nita podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nita Polite Wilson, C-Suite Trusted Advisor, Board Director, and Team Dynamics Consultant, helping businesses and their teams to successfully navigate culture, complexity, and change. And we are back with my very dear friend, Terri Wilson, the founder and CEO of Doing HR Differently. And this month, we are exploring how to discuss hot topics without torching relationships. Terri, these first two conversations were so amazing. The first one, we talked about avoiding volatility by valuing the relationship. In the last conversation, we talked about delivering a message that is received versus delivering a message that we feel is right. And in that last conversation, we ended on the notion of managing intent with impact. So let's talk about that. And one of the questions that I want the community to think about when we're talking about managing intent impact is your goal. Is your goal to dismiss someone? Mm-hmm. Is your goal to distract? Mm-hmm. Is your goal to debate? Or is your goal to have a discussion? So, Terri, what do you think?
Wow, those are like four very different things.
And they are.
It's funny, I don't know if people really think about their intention before they enter into a conversation. And I really don't think they think about it when they're engaged in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And what we're asking and offering is please do that, because that will help you to navigate this difficult discussion in a way that values the relationship. And so, being aware of when you're in a conversation and you throw something up, it's like, well, that was a distraction because I don't want to talk about this, right?
Right.
Or, I'm going to not pay attention to what you said because I don't agree with it. Now I'm dismissing it. And so, we all do these things. I do these things. And to be more self-aware of when I do them, and more importantly, why. What's going on in the conversation? What's going on in the relationship that would cause me to do that instead of listening to the person, instead of engaging with them? And so, again, giving you the opportunity to be more intentional about what you do, because you have choices. Exercise your power of choice. And if you're more intentional, then you have a greater opportunity to impact people and situations the way that you want, instead of, I'm not paying attention to my intention. I'm just letting this thing happen. And then, oh, look at the impact. Well, why did that happen? How did that happen? Well, you played a big part in that. Does that make sense?
It makes a perfect sense. And when we talk about dismissal or distraction, I think that sometimes those things come about because we haven't been thoughtful about the appropriateness regarding the places, the spaces, and the faces. And what I mean by that is, if you're in a public setting and the space is not around the conversation that you're going to have, and the people that you're having the conversation with are not your regular crew who might necessarily know you and be able to give you the benefit of the doubt, you might want to think twice about that. Because regardless of what your intention is, you might come off as dismissive, or you might come off as just being a distraction. I remember one time I was at work and someone said, well, in a meeting, I just like to throw something in the middle of the table and just blow up the whole conversation. I'm like, what's the purpose of that? Some people like to do that. And so back to your point about sometimes we're not even aware of what our goal is, our unstated, our unconscious goal. Does some of that have to do with places, spaces, and faces? And if so, how much, Terri? What do you think?
Oh my gosh, that's a big one. The answer is yes. I think it does. And it's interesting because the example you gave, I have a person that I'm coaching, and one of the things he got feedback on was just executive presence. And it's like, okay, I understand what that means in relationship to that person. But I think what he heard was, I go into a meeting, I just start asking all kinds of questions, blah, 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 blah. And without any regard to who's in the room, what the topics that we're discussing are, things like that. So we are working with him. I'm working with him on that, because while that feels good for you, that has a ripple effect with the people who are in the room. And it doesn't mean that the questions don't need to be asked. But look at the place, look at the face, look at the space. And so, again, being aware of what are you trying to do? Is this the right time? Are these the right people? all of that matters. And so again, I can't stress being self-aware and being intentional, because I'm a naturally curious person. I will ask all kinds of questions, but I've learned how to back, how to temper that so that people don't feel like they're being interrogated.
Right.
But I
Right.
actually had somebody say that to me. I was asking so many questions, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm in interrogation." And I'm like, "Oh, that's not what I intended." But that was a learning opportunity for me. It's like, Terri, ask questions, but don't be aggressive, and don't ask so many questions that people feel like it's an interrogation.
It goes back to what we said, I think, in the first conversation about language, and just, simply saying, I'm really curious about that. Tell me more. And that
Mhm.
way people understand that it's coming from a place of wanting to understand versus just kind of drilling down, almost looking for a chink in the armor. Some people do that. Why they do, we don't know, but that's some people's approach. So when we're talking about approaches, being clear about our intentions, and not only about our intentions, but wouldn't you also say that it's a good idea to be clear about our own triggers?
Oh, absolutely. You should know what your triggers are. You should know. Sometimes it's a person. Just a
Yeah.
person can be a
Mhm,
trigger, right? But
mhm,
uh, being self-aware is huge,
mhm,
because then you can manage yourself in any situation. And I think it's so important to know what triggers you and what you can do to de-escalate that situation that, quite honestly, if you don't manage, can escalate. And so maybe not putting yourself in a situation, maybe getting yourself out of a situation, maybe having a catchphrase that you say that the other person really doesn't know what that means, but you know what that means, right? Here's the point. You don't have to be triggered. That's your choice. You can do something about that. So again, exercising your power of choice. Whenever I hear people say, "Oh, she made me so mad," I'm like, "No, she didn't. You chose to get mad." And people don't like that, because it's their
No,
responsibility. Their response is their responsibility. And
right.
so I think it's really important, when you feel, if you have triggers, that you know what they are, and you know how you can excuse me, work to de-escalate that trigger
Mhm, mhm.
before that trigger starts to escalate the situation.
When you use the word de-escalate, it came to my mind an exit strategy. Do you have an exit strategy if you intend to have a conversation that there's a good chance it could go sideways? What's your exit strategy? So, Terri, how can we develop an exit strategy to make sure that when we're discussing hot topics, we don't torch our relationships?
Well, Anita, I'm going to challenge you on this. So if you and
Okay.
I are having a tough conversation, right? We just kind of get into it. What would you do if I'm being like overly aggressive on it because I feel very passionate about it? What would you do to say, "Ooh, ooh, okay, let's change course here"? What would you do?
So I tell you what, since you were very forthcoming in our first conversation, I'm going to be forthcoming in this one. My husband and I can't discuss politics. We just can't do it. And when I try, I just, I look at him with all the love in the world and I'll ask him a question. And before he can get his answer, I'm like, I'm done. Forget it. And we're just done. So if I were to think about an exit strategy, I would first of all really have to set aside my previous experiences with him and not assume that it's going to go left.
Mhm, mhm,
And I'll give you an example. We were driving one day and we were having another discussion about a topic that we've tried to discuss several times before.
mhm,
And we were both very calm. We were having a lovely drive. We weren't just discussing something that we just heard on television. It was a conversation that happened organically.
mhm,
And by the time we got done, we looked at each other and said, so we've come to a point of agreement. We're
mhm,
still not eye to eye on this particular topic, but we have found something in here that we can agree to. And it didn't seem that hard
mhm,
for
mhm,
some reason, even though we tried this particular discussion several times previously. So, to your point about what would be my exit strategy, I think my exit strategy would be okay, we've been able to maybe discuss something 10 times before, and on the 11th time, we finally got somewhere. I
mhm.
guess my exit strategy, and this is real time community. I'm thinking about this real time. So, Terri, thank you for forcing me through this. This is like unwanted coaching here. But I think what I would have to say is to remember that it's not that we can't get there. Maybe this isn't the right place and the right space to do it.
Yeah.
And so that being said, community, I think one of the things that's coming to me as we're having this conversation is think about the places and spaces that you do feel like you can advance the dialogue even 1% greater than the last time you had it. For instance, he and I cannot discuss whatever's going on TV. We just can't do it because it's too raw and we're both very strong in our opinions. But to discuss it on a walk where we're both really just trying to connect with one another and talk about the week's events and what's going on with you, here's what's going on with me, in a space that says, you're my soulmate. I love you. I never want to hurt you. I really do want to know how you see this, not to try and convince one another of rightness or wrongness, but to understand. I think that would have to be the exit strategy, to say, you know what, this isn't going in the right direction. I know we can get there, but maybe not today.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. No, that was perfect. That was absolutely perfect. The only other thing I would add to that is, again, when you have history with someone, as you mentioned, right, you have to put that history aside. And it's okay outside of that conversation to bring that conversation up and say, you know, we seem to have a hard time being able to talk about XYZ. And I know that's important to you. So let's talk about how we can talk about that without a lot of angst and all of those things that prevent us from talking about it. So what I'm offering, in addition to yours, is outside of that heated discussion or those things that bring, the heat. Let's talk about how we want to talk about it. And quite honestly, I love this phrase. We all heard it as kids. Use your words, right? So I love that, because stop talking through your emotions. Use your words to connect. And so I think those are two very good things that people can take and start to use immediately.
Community, I hope you realize you just get some really good real-time coaching from a couple of folks who do this for a living. And it's not to say that we have all the answers. It's to say we hope that you can use some of the tools that we've just presented in the last 5 minutes. Terri, I'm so looking forward to our next conversation. In the meantime, community, if anything in this conversation or the last two are helping you to discuss hot topics without torching your relationships, please share them with your network. And in the meantime, please stay in the flow with me. Follow, like, and overshare any podcast that's helping you to reframe any conversation from difficult to different. Until next time, this is Dr. Nita reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.